Okay, perfect. Okay, hi guys, I'm Hannah. I'm one of your guys' event coordinators, along with Ramya. And yeah, so basically we're gonna talk about everything that has to do with getting into research and working within a research lab here at UCLA or even elsewhere. So the first thing you want to think about is reaching out to a PI or faculty, and that can involve a lot of things, including like doing research about what different labs are studying, as well as like what department you maybe want to do research under, and you can even maybe look into like what kind of research environment you're looking for as well. Um, so again, right, these are the kind of the steps, right, we want to think about is the first is like what kind of lab you're looking to be involved in, right? A key distinction that we're going to go into soon is like a wet lab versus a dry lab. These things or these different labs environments kind of do different kinds of procedures and they focus on different things. So you want to figure out what you're interested in, right? Like I personally am more interested in wet labs versus dry labs. And again, we're going to go into the differences pretty soon. But you don't want to have to email like every single lab out there, right? There's plenty within these categories. So once you make the distinction, that's when you would find your specific faculty to email. So you can go on department websites, you can go on UCLA's like research portal. Regardless of which one it is, you're going to find a list of faculty, probably read up on what they're specifically interested in researching, and that way you can find a lab that like best fits your own academic interests. And then after that, you would write your email or maybe have in-person visits or some people even call. But again, we're going to talk about what you should include in that kind of first introductory message. So this is kind of the basic timeline, right? So you're going to do your research about what kinds of labs, who you want to work with, all of that stuff, right, that we just talked about. Then you're going to write your email. And then more often than not, you're going to have to do some sort of follow-up. And that can be you taking initiative and you doing a follow-up because you haven't gotten a response yet, which happens. So don't stress out if you don't get a response right away. But that can also mean sometimes that a PI or maybe a grad student will reach out to you and be like, hey, I'm really interested in talking to you more. Like, would you be interested in doing like an interview, right? And that might be your follow-up where you go in person or maybe do a Zoom call and you talk to them one-on-one and they kind of find out more about your interest and you find out more about their research as well as like the environment within their lab and what they're looking for. That way you can find your best fit. So just as we were talking about in that first slide, the first thing you want to do is figure out what kind of lab you want to work in, right? Wet lab or dry lab is the main distinction, I would say. And like if you want to think about very stereotypical like lab class work or like coursework or procedures, a lot of that falls into wet lab. If you think about like what you do maybe in LS23L, if you took that as a lower div or maybe Gen Chem lab, a lot of those, sorry, excuse me, a lot of those procedures you'll find in a wet lab, whereas dry labs are much more computational. So if you're really into coding or CS and you're much more into like the calculation side of things, perhaps a dry lab is a better fit for you. It really just depends on your personal interest, right? So like I am not a coder, so I stay away from dry labs. But if you're someone who likes to do like computer simulations and coding and statistical research, a dry lab would probably include more of your interests than maybe a wet lab where you're going to be like maybe staining cells or working with like actual chemicals and trying to like build molecules and stuff like that. Okay, and then once you kind of figure out which lab you want, like what kind of lab you want to work with, you have to do some research, right, to figure out like which labs you want to apply for. And so this is kind of like some inspiration, or not some inspiration, but like a little list of places you can find research labs. So you can look at departmental websites, because if you search up like, let's say the MIMG department, right, microbiology, you can search up MIMG, and then from there you'll be able to find a list of faculty, and you can click on all of their individual like bios to read about their research that they conduct here at UCLA. And if you're interested in that research, that's when you would compile their information to use when you apply. You can also just do a random Google search. So if there's a professor or like a lab that you've already heard about that you're interested in working with, and you just want to know more about like the specific faculty within that lab, like PIs and grad students and all that stuff, then you can just search up that person or maybe that lab, and then that will bring you to their lab website. And from that lab website, you would be able to pull the same information of like, oh, like, is there grad students research that you're really interested in learning more about, or maybe the faculty members or the researchers, all that stuff. Another really easy way to kind of learn more about your general opportunities here at UCLA is just to talk to your TAs and professors. Like a lot of TAs at their first like discussion when they're introducing themselves, they'll like briefly talk about their research. And if it's something that you find interesting, we like recommend that you try to build a relationship with that TA and like go to office hours and ask them about it. And you can always ask, even just really quickly, like, hey, like, I'm like a second year, whatever major, I'm really interested in what you're researching. Is there any way I can get involved? And like maybe they'll either be like, oh, I actually am looking for a research like assistant, like undergraduate student to mentor, or perhaps they'll even be like, oh, I have colleagues who are looking for a research assistant, right? And then they'll refer you to them. So it's a great way to network, and it's a great way to find those opportunities. And this last little thing in bold at the bottom is key, right? Cast a wide net. We will admit it is a journey. It is a process to find research here at UCLA. So the more people you reach out to and the more emails you send, the more people you network with or ask in person, right? The more likely it is that you're going to find the perfect lab for you. It might not be that first lab that you hear back from, but you will find it. You just have to you just have to keep trying or keep reaching out, right? And I think yeah, if you look at the bottom here, even Ramya has included that she had to reach out to over 30 people, right? And she might have only heard back from 4 of them, but she like, did find like research and stuff like that. So it might seem kind of disappointing at times if you don't hear back, but just know that the more emails you send, the more likely it is that like someone whose lab you really want to work in is going to reach back out to you. So it'll happen. You just have to keep trying. So once you do all of that, right, don't get discouraged when you see all the like how many options there are on that, right? You want to figure out how you're gonna email them. So I'm gonna go into specifics, but before we do that, just really quickly, this is Ramya's one of her like initial cold emails, just like basically introduce herself, and you're gonna notice that it's pretty short, right? It's not gonna be a long essay. It introduces herself, her interests, kind of her background, and it just is like, oh, I'm the gist is that she's interested in this lab, and that she would like to talk more about it. Oh. So this is kind of our list of do's and don'ts, right? So again, be short, concise. You want to introduce yourself and your interests, obviously, right? But you don't want to spend like an essay talking about who you are like as a student, right? They're going to get that sense pretty quickly just by you explaining your research interests or maybe your academic interests, and you want to be as genuine as possible. So we'll kind of see that in the example that we have on the next slide, but you don't want to just be like, oh, like I'm Hannah, I'm a second year biochem major and I'm interested in cancer, right? You want to make it a little bit more specific to you. That way whoever's reading your email, whether it be the grad student, the PI, or like some sort of faculty member, they understand and they can see how genuinely interested you are in their work, right? Because they want to make sure that they want to pick students who are actually interested in their research and not just like checking off a box on their application. And that being said, things you shouldn't include, like, again, don't write a long essay and don't be too generic, which kind of goes along the lines of what I was just talking about, because you do really want to show genuine interest. And what we mean by that is if you look here, right, this is kind of a broken down thing. I have some arrows pulled up at some key parts of this email. So the first part, a very brief introduction, right, kind of sets the stage that Ramya can then go into talking about her interests and her experience. So the introduction, really brief, right? It's just like a couple of sentences, like name, major, what she's interested about. And then this second arrow, the first one on the right here, that's pretty key because she is able to specifically relate the lab to what she's interested in general, right? Like outside of just regular old, like, oh, I want to be a research assistant at UCLA, right? She talks about how it's relevant to her interest in educational service. That makes it personal to Ramya. It's not just like, oh, I want to work in your lab because I'm interested in like XYZ, right? It's not something generic. It's something that anyone else could write. It's something that it's specific to Ramia, and that's gonna be key in kind of trying to build that connection with whoever's reading your email. From there, the last thing I kind of highlighted was also just the fact that she included her resume. I have friends who have been successful without including their resume in their first email, but more often than not, their resume will be asked to be seen, whether it's like at the interview or in a follow-up email as a response from the lab. So just keep in mind that like when you're working on finding research, like and you're doing all this like cold emailing and you're going through this process, you're probably going to have to share your resume. So we recommend, making sure your resume is up to date and like professional and all ready to go, so that like the moment that you are asked, in case you haven't included it yet, it's prepared for you to just send out really easily or send a PDF of. And I want to quickly say that obviously sometimes when we're applying for research, you're not going to be like Romy and have all these qualifications of previous research experience, right? It might be your first time working in research, and that's totally okay. That should not scare you from trying to reach out and finding a lab at UCLA. You can use like other academic things that you're interested in, or just talk about maybe classes. So even above here, right in the second paragraph, Rami talks about being a learning assistant. That's not being in research, right? But it shows her like passion for education, as well as like that she's hardworking. And those are like traits that people in a lab are looking for, right? They don't, because they understand they can teach you how to do procedures and do the like laboratory techniques. What they can't teach you is to be hardworking and professional and organized, right? So the fact that you have like that experience will still help, even if it's not necessarily research. And then the other thing is that like when I write my emails to reach out, I know that like I don't really have a lot of research experience when I wrote my emails. So when I wrote my emails, I talked about like specific classes that I took that like made me interested in the topic. So like for example, I'm really interested in like stem cells, and so I'll relate it back to like the 2 stem cell classes I took last year, and I'll talk about how those specific projects that I did maybe in those classes, or discussions I had, or essays I wrote in that class, made me think about that topic and how that like relates to whatever lab I'm applying to. So long story short, you can kind of pull that personal connection from anything. It does not need to necessarily be that you did research at some other institution, because not everyone has done that yet, and it can be daunting. So as long as you're just showing that you care, you're interested, you're passionate about the topic, that's how you're going to make that connection, and that's how you're going to find your perfect research lab. But yes.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. I think you summed all of that up perfectly. And I just want to say that the email examples you saw are far from perfect. I have read much, much better emails from my peers who have gotten into research. But just like Hannah was saying, I feel like what's really important is that personalization aspect. And so something I noticed with the research labs I got after my first research lab is that there was kind of a snowball effect. Like they saw that you had these qualification with doing research previously, and that just made it easier to open future doors. But definitely, like you saw that anecdote with 30 plus labs that I emailed, like that happened during my first like when I was trying to find my first research lab at UCI. And so there it really is important to tug at their heartstrings and show that personalization aspect, because that shows why you should be selected as a research assistant over other people. And at least from my experience, this might not be everyone's experience. I've found that once you get past that stage and go into interview, the interview is more just a formality to see that you're human. But at that point, you're pretty much almost always in. At least that's been the experience of many of my peers as well. And so I guess that just emphasizes the importance and the significance of creating this short but effective and cohesive email. So this next part of our slideshow is just going to delve into what you can do after you secure a research position. Before we move on, I do want to just do a quick poll of everyone here. I'm wondering who here is involved in research. You can put a thumbs up or do any reaction just so we can get a gauge. Okay, I'm seeing one. All right, awesome. So this, I guess, will be most relevant to people once you actually do secure that research position. And of course, this video is going to be recorded. And also, there are some opportunities here where you don't necessarily need to be in a research lab right now to take advantage of these opportunities. And so I feel like this part of the lecture, not lecture, slideshow is really important because it can be really daunting to look for research opportunities because UCLA says, like, great, #1 research institution, but they spread all of these resources out over like 10,000 places. And so hopefully what we do here is like organize it and compartmentalize it so that later, if you reflect on this session, you can like look through these different categories of resources that UCLA offers in a much more digestible manner. And so we can move on to that next slide. Okay, cool. So once you get into a research lab, there are some things that you can take advantage of. One of them is, and I put psychology research at the top because I personally am involved in a lot of cognitive psychology and psychology research. So this may only be relevant to others who are interested in that. But there's props, there's a departmental honors program, and there's the psychology undergraduate research conference. And so particularly with the departmental honors program and props, you don't need to already have a PI or a principal investigator in order to sign up for these opportunities. So for these opportunities, you just apply, you provide your GPA, you provide a brief resume, and then you do I would say a one-page, yes, it was a one-page application on why you're interested. And within the application itself, they give you a list of potential PIs that are willing to work with students. And you just pick and choose from that list and say like, hey, Dr. X, like they really like their research is aligned with my interests, and you just write that right within the application. You don't need to do any further emailing from there to the PI or otherwise. And so I think that is a really great opportunity because I definitely have a couple friends who didn't have a lab they were working with in the beginning, but then they applied to the departmental honors program and they got in, and then they got a PI and a mentor through that program. And so there are definitely programs at UCLA that are worth taking advantage of. Other research opportunities that you've probably heard of that are more common are like the SRP 99 and 199 contract, both of which do require students to already have a PI, but once you have that PI and you have that graduate student mentor, you can take these classes, SRP 99 or SRP 199. And what these classes allow you to do is really delve into your research. And so you write a thesis at the end of the quarter. And what I've heard is that it's not really too demanding, especially SRP 99 is not too demanding, but it kind of puts that additional responsibility on you to really delve into your research rather than just be a benchwork RA who like pipettes every day, which I definitely was that RA throughout a summer. So it can be really like exhausting to just do the same thing over and over. So this puts the responsibility not only on you, but on your graduate student mentor and your PI to give you more substantive work that shows you what the research process is like. So URSP and URFP are programs that also require you to have a PI. At least that was the case when I was a freshman. That might have changed, but they are really great because they actually offer you money. So URSP offers you $3,000, URFP offers you $1,000+, and these monies they're scaled to your financial need, and so it could be more or less depending on your financial need, which I know can be really useful because it can allow you to expand the prospects of your experiment and allow you to test more people and get more data and ultimately create a more valid experiment that you write about. So URSP and URFP also provides mentors for you to write these manuscripts and really create a cohesive argument on why your work is valuable to the research community. But there are also so many research opportunities that are offered on the undergraduate research portal. I've put a couple screenshots here. The most important thing with these research portals, though, is to recognize that there are two of them. So there's one undergraduate research portal for the sciences, and there's one for the humanities. And so depending on what you're interested in, it's important to click on the right links to get the right information. Personally, I know that as a freshman, I was so confused about all the opportunities that there were, and I wanted to really dip my toes into everything. And so I joined a dry lab and I joined a wet lab. So I was in both the science section, and I was within the um, humanities section with my psychology research. And so I thought this was a great opportunity because I really realized like, hey, psychobiology might be my major because it really intersectionally incorporates these ideas and allowed me to explore these different spaces. But something that I realized when I was looking into like really diving deep into my research was to actually look at these separate undergraduate portals and see that there were different opportunities and scholarships for these separate realms of research that I was interested in. So, and yes, we will be sharing this PowerPoint later, so you'll have access to the hyperlinks, and everything underlined is a hyperlink, so it should take you directly to the right resource. But yeah, we can move on to the next slide. So when you are taking advantage of an opportunity, it's really important to understand these opportunity-specific requirements. And so if you are looking at it from a listserv, which is what I did when I wanted to apply for the Psychology Undergraduate Research Conference my third year, and I guess I just want to say, like, don't rely on that listserv to have all the requirements laid out for you. It might, but it also most likely doesn't, because listservs are brief and they really try to get to the point and grab your attention. And so if you are interested in a research opportunity, I would really strongly suggest that you go to the appropriate website and you check what that requirements are. So URSP and URFP, they require you to be a full-time student while you are taking advantage of their programs and the scholarships that they provide you. Whereas for the departmental honors program, they don't require you to be a full-time student. So if you're considering graduating early, or you just want to take a gap quarter or gap quarters, that might be something to consider if you would still like to continue your research during those gap quarters or after graduation. Another thing that might be important to consider, especially in this post-COVID era, is whether the research opportunities are in person or online. One of the opportunities that I was able to do last year as a result of the pandemic was a conference at Berkeley where we just were on Zoom and we were presenting a PowerPoint version of our poster, which I thought was a really great opportunity because I could talk with people from all over California about the different psychology research that we were doing. But the thing that made it so great is that because it was online, it was so much more accessible. And so if you want to do research opportunities beyond UCLA, it might be really important to see whether those opportunities are in person or online to make them more accessible. And just like I was saying in the previous slide, of course, it's important to be aware of whether you are doing research for the humanities or the sciences so that you can get the resources and the scholarships that are most relevant to the research realm that you're interested in. So the next main point is to ask and gather letters of recommendation early. Most of these selective research opportunities, regardless of if they're super selective or not really selective, they're going to ask for a letter of rec. And so these letters of rec are likely going to come from your graduate student mentor, but they will very likely need to be signed by your PI. So asking for these letters of recommendation early is a great way to ensure that those letters of rec get sent in on time and that your PI is also able to sign it, and that just allows your application to be complete so you don't miss out on an opportunity. And this is also just out of respect because our graduate student mentors, they're also very busy people. And so writing earlier allows you to save any buffer room for any mishaps, miscommunication, etc. And something that I also really suggest about letters of recommendation is within the email you write to your graduate student mentor, tell them that you would like the letter of recommendation to hit on XYZ aspects. So be like, if I was writing to my graduate student mentor, I'd be like, dear Megan, like I'm applying to this program, and I think it would be really great if you could touch on the fact that I presented at X conference and I wrote Y abstract and like something else. Like, I feel like because our mentors have so many students that they lead, it's important to also jog their memory, and that serves as a double benefit. It benefits you because you get the information that you want represented on that letter of rec, but it also helps them because they don't need to like really think about who you are and like what you did. It's more like you just put it on paper for them. So that's really helpful. And another thing too, that it ties back to the first point, is that sometimes these opportunities ask for very specific things to be talked about by your letter of recommendation writer. Like, for example, they might talk about like what does this person look like when they're administering experiments? Like what kind of characteristics do they display that make them a good fit? And so in those cases, it's really important to let your letter of rec writer know of these requirements so that they can provide a letter of recommendation that fits the needs of the opportunity you're applying to. And also, most opportunities require you to write an abstract. And so what I used to write the abstracts so that I could apply to the opportunities I applied to last year were through the PERC website, or the Psychology Undergraduate Research Conference website. And also I just looked at like example successful abstracts, and I just like read through some abstracts from Google Images. And so I just like clicked on different images and I read it, and I took the pieces that were most relevant to me and my work and try to incorporate that into my abstract. And so I have provided a screenshot of a successful abstract that I submitted to PERC and another conference I did last year, which I can't remember. But I feel like this abstract takes into account the fact that I didn't have my experiment completed, but I still wanted to present about it. And so I feel like it provides enough background and it relays my hypothesis in a way that shows that, hey, despite not completing my experiment, I'm still a credible person who can talk about my research. And so I know that was something that I was really struggling with and I had to look around for a lot of resources for. So I wanted to just provide a screenshot in case it is relevant to anyone else here. And then another thing too is to request friends and mentors to read over your abstract and your work. And so this is especially important to get multiple viewpoints on your work. So you want someone who like knows your research, like your mentor, to read it, but you also want an objective person who doesn't really know about much about what you're doing to really hone in on the points that are left unexplained. So when I was going through this abstract, I definitely showed my roommate it, and she was like, "Hey, you didn't actually explain what like learn desirable difficulties are." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I just assumed like that was foundational knowledge, but it's not." So I feel like having that objective person to read over it can really identify gaps in your abstract or any application that you're submitting. Okay, we can move on. So it's really important to stay organized. This is an Excel sheet I created in the beginning of October 2021 when I was a very neurotic third year, thinking that I was not involved enough in yet UCLA. And so I created this out of stress, but I think it really helped me get organized with the kinds of research opportunities that UCLA provides. And it was a great way to remind myself of the requirements. And so I did kind of start losing track after a while. So the intention was that the things in red are the stuff that I'm rejected from, and the things in green were the things that, at least like preliminarily, I was accepted for. And there wasn't really supposed to be anything in white, but there is a lot of white because I lost track. But what I ended up using this Excel sheet for was to like continuously look back and see when deadlines were, so that if like I was bored over break, I could like see that, hey, you know what, in February there's a research thing coming up. Maybe I can start working on that, and maybe I can try to expand my research horizons a little bit more. And so each time I got an email from a psychology listserv, each time I got an email from my personal lab about these opportunities, I used to add them into this Excel sheet. And it helped me stay organized about the kinds of opportunities that are relevant to me, but also that I could potentially apply for. And so there are different columns with the website information, their deadlines, and also just like specific notes that might be relevant to me, like whether they only accept a certain group of people or whether they have income restrictions, etc. So I used to write that into the notes just so that when I look back at this resource, I'll have all the information I need right in front of me. And another thing I did is like I put all the dates into my Google Calendar. And so a month before these opportunities they were due, I just get a ding on my Google Calendar, and then I would see that it's due in a month, and then I would consider whether or not I want to apply to these opportunities. And it's actually because of this Excel sheet that I ended up writing and submitting a 23-page literature review manuscript, just because my roommate and I, we were like, oh, we have time to do this, and it's just like due in a couple days, let's do it. Like we did not make it. It was a terrible manuscript, but it was just a great way to I guess like work on our own literature review skills, but also like not waste the time that we had at the end of fall quarter last year. And so I guess that leads me to my next point, and we can move on to the next slide. It's to, uh, are we able to move on? Oh. Okay, awesome. It's to not be afraid of failure. I failed so much while I was looking for research, whether that be like getting ghosted and rejected from PIs, or just like not getting my abstracts chosen, or just like receiving like, hey, your poster was good, but it wasn't great. And so we're not gonna publish it. And I was like, okay, like that's okay. So failure is gonna happen. And I just really want to normalize that because it can be so it can feel so bad when you like work like 20 plus hours on something and then you see that you don't get accepted into that journal or you don't get the opportunity to present your work at a conference. But I guess what it's important to note is that this is part of the process, very unfortunately. And so it's so, so amazing for you to even take that step to apply to these opportunities. That shows how great of a researcher you are and that shows your initiative. And so it's really important to like draw upon this initiative when you apply to future opportunities. And so this is like a snippet of me and my roommate right after we wrote this 23-page manuscript in 3 days. Once again, do not know why we decided to do that, but I guess after all that work, we were like, oh yeah, like we think that we can do it. But ultimately, the outcome was not what we expected, and that was okay because it opened doors for us to look at other opportunities that might be in the same domain. So particularly, I was really interested in like educational research, which is what this manuscript was about. And so while researching and writing this manuscript, I was able to discover that I was actually like, in terms of like niche interests, I was really interested in like collaboration versus individual learning and how like active learning through collaborative methods can help someone be a better test taker. And so I was able to discover that about myself. And now as a researcher at the Departmental Honors Program, like that's what my research is focused on. And it was heavily inspired by this manuscript that we wrote. And so rejection is just a redirection. And I guess the purpose of the slide is like, you are amazing and you can do it. And despite any failures that you face, you will be able to achieve that end goal that you are seeking to achieve. Yeah. So now I know that I did get a show of hands. There are a few people here who are involved in research. So instead of answering this question, I think potentially we can open the space for any questions that people have. I know there are some questions in the chat as well that we can go over, but that's all for us in terms of content. So thank you so much for coming and feel free to unmute and ask any questions and we can go ahead and answer the questions in the chat.